Hi poets and writers, I'm Kaye Spivey. I asked on a couple of different platforms for some questions you guys would like me to answer now that I have 1,000 subscribers. And I thought about doing this as a live stream, but I hadn't like set up for it to be a live stream or anything. Like I hadn't scheduled anything. I was gonna do this last week, which is why there was no video last week. I was going to do a Q&A for last week, and then I happened to have the world's largest pimple on my chin. That's the actual truth behind it. I just didn't feel like filming. And then today I was like, hey, you know what? I don't have prepared video for this week. So it is going up late. I'm very sorry. But I needed to do the Q&A since I asked you guys the questions. And I've gotten a lot of like similar types of questions over the years. So I thought I'll just talk about it because I have been on this platform for a little while now. Like YouTube has become my home. I've been here since, geez, when did I really start? I started my like AuthorTube channel in 2017. It had been the beginning of 2017 when I did the 100 poems in 100 days challenge, which I haven't done since, you've noticed. I really should. It was a great challenge. Like I wrote a lot of really good stuff, but I've not been in that place mentally, emotionally, physically. So I haven't done that again, but I would like to get around to it. It was really fun. And I highly recommend doing it if you've been in a poetry slump. But yeah, so I've been here since 2017. And I've actually had a YouTube channel a lot longer than that. I mostly used my YouTube channel to like send videos of trips. Like that's the reason I had a YouTube channel, was so that I could share videos of trips I took with my family. And so some of my way older videos are just me being abroad and doing things. And a lot of those I've privated now. But even older than that, and this would have had to have been like 2010, maybe 2009 at the earliest. But I actually started this channel. Like I started YouTube from the beginning as a poetry channel. There's no proof of that because I've deleted all of those videos. I went back through at some point and got rid of all of them. I used to post me reading poetry, and I would like set up in my dorm. This was all in college. I would set up and read poetry, and it was a poetry channel like from the very, very start back in the day. And I got rid of all of it. There's no backups of anything. Like it's all gone. It's gone. There's no getting any of those poems back. Like I have the poems, but there's no getting those video clips of me reading them back. It would have been nice though, to like keep all of that, to still have that to this day. But that is what the channel started as. And that is what you guys are most interested in. Like whenever I ask for any kinds of questions, people come to me with poetry questions, and I really appreciate it. Like I've been doing a lot of study in this field for a long time. Like I've been doing a lot of work in poetry for a long time, and I might not have like the most to show for it. I might not have more than like say some of these really, really prolific poets to show for it, but I've still been here a while. I've been around the block. I can be your poetry mom, and I have answers for a lot of people's questions. So most of the times I just answer them, but I thought some of the more common questions, maybe I'd try to hit on some of those now, just in a video, talk to you guys, something a little bit more laid back and casual. I just wanted to do kind of a frequently asked questions kind of thing. I wanted to answer some questions that people had asked. Maybe do a poetry reading. I was thinking, oh, I'll read you something recent, but I haven't been writing a lot recently. I think I've mentioned in a few videos, I get seasonal affective disorder. It's not like the kind of depression where like you need to worry about my safety and my health. It's the kind of depression where I can't function. Like I can't get things done. I have a really hard time doing anything. And so the only thing I've been able to do outside of like get into Stray Kids, apparently, I'm really into Stray Kids all of a sudden. It's because BTS has been on a hiatus. There's been nothing new. So other than like lie on the couch and watch YouTube videos, it's really hard for me to do other things. And the only thing I've been trying to focus on is my second channel, because it's also Stray Kids related. It's just K-pop video lyric reactions. I've been reacting to K-pop lyrics from a poetry standpoint, having a lot of fun with that. That's what I've been doing, and I haven't been writing a lot. And so when I went back to find a poem to read for you guys, there was some depressing stuff to read. And so I'll decide towards the end if we're reading a poem or not. Sorry to keep you on edge. Okay, we're back. The battery's been changed. So I'll just go through some questions that I've gotten and just answer them. First question is actually about fiction writing and what's something in my fiction writing that I want to try but haven't yet. It's such a good question because I've been doing a lot of like fantasy angled fiction writing, and then I did a lot of smutty fan fiction this past November. You don't understand. That was the thing. That was, up until that point, the thing I wanted to try that I hadn't, was like really smutty writing. Sometimes you just gotta get that kind of stuff out of your system. So up until then, it was that. I've done that, calmed down from it. Something that I really want to try that's been on my mind recently, it's still a fantasy. I like fantasy a lot. I like the things you can do with fantasy. Realistic fiction, I think people find out, especially in times like we've had recently, books set in 2020 that were written, you know, 30 years ago and could not have predicted anything. People are like, wow, that's super unrealistic now. And you run into that, but it's not something you're ever gonna run into in fantasy. If you write a fantasy effectively enough, it's your own thing. It's its own standalone world and time. And I like that a lot. And I like that you can change the rules of things. And I just read a lot of fantasy. I enjoyed a lot of fantasy growing up. And I enjoy a lot of fantasy now. And I like the elements in fantasy that don't tie you into the real world. Like, I like writing and reading as escapism. And if it's gonna tie me too much to something, sometimes it feels more like a chore. Something though that I really want to write is a story about a character who's not really, I don't want to say like redeemable, like someone who's pitiable, but not a good person. I usually write about heroes who I'd want to like be friends with. And this is someone who, like, even if you'd want to be friends with them, you wouldn't necessarily want to have to deal with them all the time. Like, you really wouldn't have to want to rely on them. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I want to write that type of character, like that type of protagonist. I think it's something that's more in fashion now, like the anti-hero, but not necessarily even that, just like someone who's just a little bit frustrating, but that is pitiable enough that you're still kind of rooting for them. Like, I don't know if I'm making it sound like kind of too annoying and like it would be a bad story, but I'm kind of edging towards that. It's a character I've used before, but I've never made them the protagonist. And as I was, actually it was as I was reading, oh there it is. As I was reading Anatomy of the Story, John Truby pointed out, maybe you're writing from the wrong character's perspective. Like, maybe the story you're trying to tell is the wrong character's story. And I was like, well, whose story am I trying to tell? And I realized it's not the same story that I've been like struggling with for years, but one of the characters has the most interesting story. And I've always known that character had the most interesting story. When I first had the idea that character was the most interesting character. And I've always had them be like one of the, like a supporting character, because I thought I can't really focus that story on this character. But I could write that character's story, and they're not really a like good person. And there's reasons that they're not a good person, but a lot of it is just like kind of internal anger things. It would be really interesting to write that. And so I've been thinking about it a lot. So fiction-wise, I think in the next year I'm gonna really work on that story to kind of get me back into writing, to noveling seriously. Noveling is just not my most strong point. I definitely like feel confident about poetry I've written, and actually I felt more confident about short stories recently, but the novels, I think mostly because gaining traction with that one has just not really happened. It's a little bit harder to be like, okay, get into another one, and that's the one I want to do. Next question. My favorite form of poetry to write. Free verse for sure. And then the sestina is the other one. I love writing sestina. I think it's a fun form. And I know it's like a long form and it's kind of annoying in some ways, but I love the sestina. I don't even know if I like the sestina the most to read because it can be so frustrating and hard to do, but I certainly like writing it. I feel like that's such a fun exercise. And I've made the video of talking about sestina public, so you don't even need to be a Patreon supporter to watch that video. So maybe I'll just link that at the end here. But yeah, I love Sestina, but free verse, I feel like you can focus more on the words and on the language in English when it's in free verse. And so I really, really like that aspect of it, and that the rules aren't something set in stone. There's something that I'm finding and I'm creating to go with the poem, that I'm not starting off with a rigid structure. The poem is telling me what it's going to look like. And I really, really enjoy that a lot. And what forms of poetry do I find the most challenging? Anything that has to have a rhyme scheme, like real strict rhyme schemes, I struggle, and I don't know why, because it's not like it's hard. I think my brain feels very restricted by rhyming. A hard rhyme on the end of lines can get really grating really fast. And so trying to figure out, there's lots of cool ways to do it. There's lots of ways to like kind of change the rhyme a little bit to make it softer, or to make it on odd syllables or things like that. And so you can do a lot of cool things with rhyme, but I find it hard to do. And I find it annoying if I don't do it well. And so I very rarely write forms with rhyme schemes, like something like a sonnet. I didn't enjoy writing sonnets. I felt like it was annoying. I personally dislike tying the poem to a form. I prefer that the form comes with the poem, and that they kind of marry together and speak together to form the best version of art. And when you start with a form, sometimes for me, I find that very limiting, and that sometimes the poem that comes out of that is not the best poem it could have been, that sometimes the form and the poem don't end up matching very well, if that makes sense. And this one is, what is one of your favorite things to do just before or after writing? Just before I start writing, I'll usually make some tea. If I'm writing really early, I'm gonna make coffee and have breakfast. But otherwise, I'll usually, actually, yeah, probably it's like have a meal, make a hot beverage. I'll do that right before writing, because it's like, if it's later in the day, I need to eat lunch first. I can't do things on an empty stomach. I get super hangry. Like if I'm ever not nice, it's because I'm hungry. I really gotta eat at regular intervals to function. So eating something and then having a nice warm beverage, because I just like having like some hot tea. I've got some right now. Actually, this is just about the right temperature. Early in the morning, coffee. Later in the day, definitely some tea. And usually it's green tea. I'm like addicted or something. Well, I'm addicted to coffee. I can't function without coffee. Probably isn't healthy. Tea, I really like, Costco has a brand of like Essentia matcha mix. And if I just want something hot to drink, that's my go-to. I just throw that in. I like the flavor. It's not like fancy tea. It's just something I can drink a lot of and not have to think about it too much. It's nice. After I write, it depends upon what's been bothering me. Like if there's something I needed to get to while I was writing, I gotta go do that. So if it was a chore or something like that, or if there was a video I wanted to watch but I was like, no, I need to write for it, I'll do that afterwards. Afterwards is when I get done the things that I've just put off. I've gotten a lot of versions of this question, but basically the question is, when you're trying to submit poetry to a literary magazine, to a contest, anything, like how do you make sure you're retaining your rights? Retaining your rights is super important as a creative person in general. If you're doing anything with creative work, and especially if it's your words, if it's your poetry, it is super, super important that you don't sign away your right to something, because once someone else owns the rights to your work, they own that. You can't then republish it. You have to ask permission to do anything with it, especially if you're not being paid for it. There's no reason that someone else should get the rights to your work. And so most of the time when you submit to like a literary magazine or even to a contest, there'll be an amount of time that they have the rights for it. Usually that's like first publishing rights. Most of the time it's something like first publishing rights, which means no one gets to publish it before them. They get to be the first person online, in print. Usually they'll specify, but if they don't, just assume it's everywhere. First publishing rights. And then there's normally an amount of time after which the rights revert back to you, that then it can be published elsewhere, and that's totally fine. So like if you want to put it up on your blog and they said they need to have 2 months before the rights return back to you, you have to wait 2 months after their publication, and then they come back to you. The coming back to you is important. Them having the rights for 2 months isn't that big a deal. Like that's pretty good. Otherwise, if they don't specify, I always think, at least like out of politeness, it's polite to at least wait a year before publishing it yourself, like putting it up on your blog or anything like that, or publishing it in your own book. It's most polite to wait at least a year, but if they didn't specify, then they should have returned back to you immediately. Again, because they're publishing you, though, you want to create a good relationship, so oftentimes I'll try to wait at least a year before publishing something from when it appeared in print. And some places will be more specific, and just like you've got to read what they say, and if they say nothing, you should be able to ask. And you should never okay someone publishing your work if they're not willing to tell you what the rights agreement is, like how long the rights will stay with them and when they'll return back to you and what rights they're taking. And I mentioned like the first publication rights are usually the most important. A lot of places will also ask that, especially for online, that they are also able to continue to have your work on their site. Like even if the rights return to you, they're still, I forgot how they say it though. Shoot, I should have looked this up first. I forgot how they say it, but there's a way that they word it. And you can always like Google phrases. It's really easy to Google the phrases because they'll use legal jargon sometimes and it gets really confusing. If you're ever confused, let that be a red flag. If you're too confused about their rights agreements, that's kind of a red flag. Like it should be clear enough and simple enough that a normal person can understand it. But there is a phrase, I don't remember it, but basically like they get to continue publishing it online in that original format, and that they could add you to a anthology later down the line. That one can be a little bit tricky because if they're going to put you in an anthology as well, they should be paying you again. And I have not yet seen somewhere that offers to like pay for the first time and then also for the anthology, but you know, just be careful with things. If they are buying those rights, you should still get the rights to do what you want with it afterwards anyway. That even if they're also allowed to have it on their website, that you're allowed to as well. That kind of thing. If they don't have it clear on their website, that's kind of a red flag, honestly. Like they're asking to take your intellectual property and they're not telling you what they're doing with it or when it's coming back to you or anything like that. That's kind of a red flag. They should be willing to tell you when you reach out and ask, and if they will not, don't sign into anything like that. Don't give people your work. That we're living in an age of self-publishing where you could definitely find an audience for yourself that probably will be bigger than whatever some sketchy magazine is possibly putting out. Like you could reach your own fans, or you could find a different literary magazine that isn't so sketchy. Like we're living in a world where we can choose, and so don't settle for something that might be a little bit sketch, because you retaining the rights to your work so that you can publish it how you want to again in the future is very, very, very important. It's something I feel very strongly about, if you can't tell from this rant. And if you're ever confused, just take it as a red flag. Like it's better to be safe than sorry in publishing, because should you get big or they get big or someone gets big enough that it would be in their best interest to sue over something, that is not a battle you want to fight. You do not want to get into any kind of legal scuffle with anybody about your work. You want to be able to say, no, this is mine. And if you wrote it and you submitted it, it should be your right to do what you want with it after whatever the contract specifies, which is usually first publishing right. This is something that like my most popular post on Tumblr is all about that. I think, well, it had like 50,000 reblogs or whatever at some point, but I don't know if it is more than that or if it's kind of stagnated, but that post is entirely about that. Because one time I got reached out to by someone and they literally had like a 10-paragraph like rights agreement that was in super legal jargon, and just one phrase from it, I think I copied and pasted that phrase, where it was so legal jargony, but also asking for like perpetual rights to like forever be unpaid. And I was just like, this is so sketch. And so I wrote a thing about that, basically being like, watch out, like know what your rights are when you're publishing things. And it's been my most popular post, and I appreciate that because it is very, very important. I also think it's funny that my most wildly popular video now is the 7 mistakes new poets make, when that video literally had 3 views for years. It's hilarious to me how many people find it and how many people will like write weird comments on it too. Like I still get weird, I don't respond to most comments on like super old videos unless they have like a specific question or something at this point, because I've been getting more comments. And now that I have my other channel, which is K-pop focused, that channel's growing so fast. I can't keep up. Like the amount of comments, because it's K-pop fans and they're fans of something else and I'm responding to it. Like I get so many comments on that channel, like way more than this channel. I'll have to be better about comments on this channel because that channel has overwhelmed me with comments. Like I can't keep up with them at all. I get comments on that super old video where I was just like, I don't know what to say back. I really appreciate all of the views. It's just very funny to me that that video is so popular. And then I got some people asking about like poetry tube, like doing YouTube as a poet, general like recommendations and things. And the thing is like the community is pretty small. You have like almost like 2 different, or like a couple different factions, I guess, because there's like the booktubers who are also into poetry, and they tend to be like younger, largely women, more towards the like Insta poetry fans. Obviously not all of them. Booktube is vast and diverse, but a lot of it will be like booktubers who are also into poetry. And there are some fantastic people in that category. The Poets Corner is one that just stands out because I think she does fantastic reviews. She hasn't posted in a while though. It's very sad. I haven't seen her on her channel at all. I think she's moved over to more on Instagram. Jen Campbell, of course, is a poet and likes to recommend poetry books, and I adore her so much. Shelley Flowers, of course, I always mention, also hasn't posted in a while, which is totally fine. But people who do more of that kind of book review style. There's also a couple of teaching poets on YouTube. Josie Alford is one that I really like her. She's a poet who also does kind of more educational style videos. Dimitri Reyes Poet is a good one. He is, I believe, a poetry teacher. I think Reedsy has some good videos about poetry. Then there's also like performance poetry channels, like Button Poetry will post, and I think they have some of the more well-known like live mic videos, those kinds of things. Those are really fun ones. Those ones are so like hit or miss with whether or not you'll like the poet, because they're like large poetry channels and they'll just post who was reading at live mic nights or open mic nights. I don't know why I kept calling it live, but open mic night kind of things, performance poetry. There are a lot of channels for that. Button is the one I could think of off the top of my head. I mean, there are also TED Talks. That's how I found Sarah Kaye, who I absolutely adore, was through her TED Talk. There's, of course, quite a large category of more like, I don't know, because some of them are almost like edgelords. University style poets. Poets who are interested in the kind of poetry that you would learn if you were going to school for poetry. If you were at university for poetry, the kind of poets who are in those kinds of very literary poetry programs. That one's dominated by more like older men. So it's kind of like the really young girls and like the older men, and then kind of this mishmash of poets in between. And there's not like a lot of like a community sense within YouTube, I don't think. There's kind of within those factions, there's a little bit of a community sense. But because poetry is such a widespread thing, like poetry is like the same category as novels is a category. And if you're like, okay, all the people who are into novels, well, you've got booktube, you've got authortube, you have people who specialize in horror, people who specialize in romance, people who specialize in fantasy, people who only read this type of thing, people only read this other type of thing, people who only write that type of thing, people who are making educational videos, people who are making vlogs. Like, there's so much variety. I don't think as many people are doing that kind of thing with poetry, and part of it is just because it's so widespread. No one really like thinks about how all the categories break down, but they do. They break down quite a bit. So recommending people, like obviously anyone I've named I think has a great channel and would be interesting, but that's definitely not everybody. Like, there are so many other people out there doing poetry videos. I mean, yeah, maybe I should just do like a recommendation of just poetry channels. I could certainly do that in the future. it is harder because it's like, what type of poetry are you interested in? Do you just want to listen to people read poems? And there'll be people who do mixed things. Like I do mixed things. Sometimes it's trying to be educational. Sometimes I'm reading some of my own poetry. Sometimes I'm talking about poetry books. Like there's definitely people who do that. But also there's plenty of channels that just do one thing or another thing. Like, are you more interested in people reading their own poetry? Or are you more interested in people doing poetry reviews? Like those would be two different channels most of the time. But I think also if you're looking for advice about how to start a YouTube channel specifically for poetry, you also should think about like where you want to sit in those categories also. Do you want to do more of a general poetry channel? Are you a poet doing a general poetry channel? Are you an avid poetry reader doing a general poetry channel? Do you want to specialize in one thing? Like, is epic poetry your forte and that's the thing you love to read and write? Like, do you want, the more you specialize on YouTube, the better. Obviously my channel is slow growing because I'm terrible at specializing, which is why I had to start a whole second channel so I didn't unspecialize in this channel. I have too many categories. You'd all be flooded with K-pop and leaving quickly. Think about what your interest is in poetry. What thing kind of drives you towards poetry? Do you want to read a lot of your poems? And then in that case, set up a setup and record a lot of videos of you reading your poetry. Like figure out what the thing is that you want to do. And if it's just talking about some poetry that you love, there's a space for that, absolutely. If you want to do a whole bunch of different things, there is definitely a space for that. The thing with YouTube is, especially when you're starting a YouTube channel, the more comfortable you can make yourself, because it's kind of an awkward thing to get started with. Like, it's a lot of fun once you get used to it and you kind of enjoy talking to a camera by yourself in a room and like getting all made up for it. Like once you find your niche, it's a lot of fun, but until you find the niche, it's very, very awkward. It's super awkward, and super awkward editing it later and watching yourself. Just decide what you want to do, like what makes you feel comfortable, what you think you have something new to share about, something that you would probably enjoy doing that you'd want to do anyway, even if you were posting to nobody. Like if your channel were private, something you would still enjoy doing. Do that kind of thing. It's the best way to start a channel because it'll give you some longevity. It'll give you some like purpose, like something to do on YouTube. If you're trying to follow a trend or trying to fit into a very specific niche, or you're trying to do something that wouldn't be within your normal comfort zone, you're probably not gonna get very far. You're probably going to burn out quickly or be discouraged, because it is discouraging. Like, you're not going to just break off and suddenly be like the next big thing. Like, especially if poetry is where you're going, just expect a very, very small audience, expect very low numbers. Getting 100 views on a video is really good in the poetry community, and you'll have these breakouts who get millions, but that's not common. It's really not common. And it's gonna be even less common if you're talking about something that you don't have some comfort talking about. Just in general, like if you're starting a channel, just start, because that's the best thing you can do. But do something that works for you, and don't be afraid to sort of switch it up. If you want to start off doing some book reviews, that's a really, really good way. I think book reviews, the booktube community by and large is very, very friendly and welcoming. Talking about poetry books you love is a great way to get started. Talking about poets that you love is a great way to get started. I think that those are some of my earlier videos. We're talking about books that I would recommend and talking about my collection. I have many poetry books. Starting off by just reading your poetry. I would just say tag accurately and heavily, and know that your numbers are going to be small for a long time. Really good lighting is really important. The higher your picture quality, the more likely people are to continue coming back, and that doesn't necessarily mean having a great camera, but it does mean if your camera is not amazing, then making up for it with better lighting is going to be your friend. Better audio. I don't have the best audio, but people with better audio setups who are willing to do like a separate mic and then sync up the audio and the video, they do very, very well. Things like that can really, really help you. Having kind of a look can really, really help you. Try not to have just like a solid white background that could be very boring unless you are gorgeous and have done your makeup beautifully or something like that. So there's something for people to focus on since it's a visual medium. It's more important than you think to focus on the fact that it is a visual medium. Like, if you don't want to wear makeup, that's totally fine, but just know that the internet's really, really judgy, and so making yourself appear nice does go a much longer way than it needs to. And be aware that while I think the poetry community can be really, really supportive and really, really like just lovely in general, I think most people who at least comment on my videos with something poetry related are really, really sweet. There are also plenty of people who are not, and I think you need to be prepared for people coming at you with kind of nasty comments or totally just like bonkers off the wall comments that have nothing to do with the video. It's more often that, where it's just like a random troll and they'll have caught on to one bizarre detail and they'll have something to say about it. You know, they're probably like massive Bukowski fans. Just be prepared to curate your comment section to a point where you feel comfortable. Be prepared for some weirdos to show up there as you start to gain traction, and also just be prepared for not to gain traction. Like, you do have to kind of do a YouTube channel for yourself. Definitely thinking about what you're trying to bring to the community is really helpful. And, you know, watch some other people's videos, like watch a few other channels. I mentioned some before. I'm gonna try to come up with like a top 10 poetry tube people to follow, from my opinion at least. I'll try and come up with something like that so that you'll have some kind of a resource out there for that kind of thing, because I know there's not a lot of resources. If you're interested in doing something educational related for poetry, there's need for that. When I did recommending how to write poetry book, there wasn't really another video like that, and I had looked for it because I wanted to know what how to write poetry books I should be buying. And not only were there not a lot of those available, I couldn't find a YouTube video about it. So I bought some books, I read some, and I made a video. That's the most helpful thing you can do in the community, is like see where you feel like there's kind of an absence and fill that absence. And if that absence is your poetry, then fill it with your poetry. Yeah, this video actually ended up being really, really long. I was worried I wasn't gonna have anything to say. Apparently, I just really like talking to the camera. This is what happens when you start a YouTube channel. You just get really, really comfy talking to the camera all the time. Appreciate you, love you, and thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again very, very soon. And if you have any more questions, obviously leave them down below. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. I will try to get back to doing more of like the normal kind of content at some point. I just haven't been reading and writing a lot. This seasonal depression is not quite past yet. I'm working on it. It's time to start writing again. And I'm hoping that your writing is coming along really, really well, and that you're having a really nice winter. Spring is coming. Spring will be here soon. Let's enjoy it when it gets here. I will talk to you again very, very soon. Lots and lots of love. Bye.